This book is on our cocktail table right here, and that's probably where yours will be. It's not the kind of book you read and then put on a shelf somewhere. You read it, you reread it, you share the pictures with your friends. It's a real coffee table type of book that is absolutely sensational. There are stories in there. For example, Nancy, I always knew your dad was a generous man, but he never wanted to display this publicly and never wanted to take credit for the things he did. But he did a lot of favors for a lot of people, like Sammy Davis Jr. The list goes on. Sammy Kahn. You could sit here for an hour and enumerate people that your dad helped.
I think most people in show business, and probably most people who are fortunate, tend to feel that, excuse me, that it's important to give something back. You know, I think when you consider what's going on in the world today, especially, it's important when we have enough to give some of it away. You know, it's very important.
There was a man who was killed in Latin America several years ago. Hadn't been that long. And he was in government service. He was from Indiana, left behind a wife and children. And your dad went to Indiana, to this small town, and did a concert to raise money for his widow. That's typical of the things your dad would do.
People are beginning to find out about these acts now, but he used to insist that they be kept quiet and secret because he never wanted to embarrass anyone. And I told him when I was putting the book together, I said, listen, you're going to have to just shut up and let me do this because it's time.
You said shut up to Frank Sinatra?
You're going to have to just cool it. It's time now that people understand what kind of a man you are, because the public has the wrong idea. In 50 years of singing, he's had, how many times have you read something negative, would you say, in 50 years?
In 50 years, unfortunately, too often, I would say.
Too often. But not often enough when you think that if that's the accurate image, then we should be reading a lot more. What happens, of course, we talked about the rumors, but also people use him a lot. People in the press. We used to joke, we used to say there's going to be a school for cub reporters called, a class called the How to Get Frank Sinatra class. And if you didn't pass it, if you couldn't get him and embarrass him, God bless you, or nail him on network TV or a front page headline, you couldn't pass the class, and we called ourselves the Target family and all that. Anyhow, so I said, listen, it's time that we start undoing some of that damage, and we're going to have to show what you really have done in your life.
A good example would be that cub reporter who was there in New York City at the Met when your dad was singing there and was having a press conference. It's in the book. The story about the young lady walked up and said, do you think you ought to be singing here?
Oh, yes, and he was so hurt.
Yes.
He was crushed.
Because she was, by implication, she was saying that he wasn't an operatic singer.
I know, of course.
And
all performers are insecure to start with.
Sure.
So it did hurt.
But he was an easy target because if you did that, you knew you'd get headlines. It's not like you're picking on somebody.
Course. And you just get a rise out of him and you get headlines.
In the book, there are 400 photographs, and probably you had a hard time narrowing it down.
Did you look in the back? I fought I can tell this story now because my editor isn't with my publishing company anymore. He's with another one. And my publishing company was really bad. They wouldn't let me spend any more money. The very back. I don't know if you can just catch any of this. It's not important that they be right side up.
You're talking about the album covers?
Any of this? Just let me zip through here.
Okay.
We photographed every one of these album covers on my front porch. These are all the stills from the movies, not all the stills, but they are one still from each film he's ever made. So it's really for the collector. That's why I love this book, for the collector. These are friends and relatives and just sort of a conglomeration. And the very back is about it's called For the Record, and it lists all of the events that occurred in each year of his career.
So for the real Frank Sinatra fan, this is more than just a book. I want to show my favorite picture in here. This is not a photograph, but rather a painting, And why did you choose to put this in here, and this one of your
Well,
favorites too?
I wanted this to be the cover, and again, my publishing company said no. They said, that's not Frank Sinatra. I said, what do you mean that's not Frank Sinatra?
Who would
That's
know
my
better than you?
favorite picture of Frank Sinatra. That's exactly my father. Exactly. It's
what's
a
he
painting
thinking
by
there? What would you think would be on his mind?
Probably should I have unbuttoned my shirt or should I have worn a tie? No, that's a painting by Paul Clemens, a wonderful portrait artist.
We have some more of the shots from the book too. We like to show, Nancy, that we have that the people can get a close up, because you have not only in words but also in pictures the whole story of his career. This is an early shot, I would imagine.
It looks like when he was having the bust made by Joe Davidson, the artist. That's what it looks like to me. We have that bust. It's in bronze, and it's really quite beautiful. That was in the Bobby Soxer days.
As we go through these pictures, and here is this...
Yes, now they're showing him from this side because the left side of his face and head were torn by forceps at birth.
He nearly died, didn't he?
He nearly died. And his ear nearly fell off. Isn't that sweet? That was at a wedding, I think. No. Was that First Communion? Look at that hair. Wow.
Butch wax.
That's in Hoboken, I believe. My mom should be around about that time.
You know, speaking of your mom, you were very kind in the book to share with all of us who have read it the fact that your mom was way ahead of her time when it came to thinking. Even though she and your dad were divorced, she believed in joint custody even before it became chic, before we got into the 70s and 80s when people talked about that. And she made sure that you had time with your father, didn't she?
Absolutely. That's my brother right there, his first picture for the press, with my mom, of course, and a picture of Dad because he was in LA at the time. That's looking out at Toluca Lake from our house there.
There's a cute story about one Christmas there in Toluca Lake in the book as well. Your dad lived in Toluca Lake, but he wouldn't join the country club, would he?
Well, that's another long story. The country clubs were, as you know, not unlike sororities and fraternities, really, in that they were restricted.
A few years ago.
They wouldn't allow Jewish members, and I'm sure the word black never entered the vocabulary. You know, I think that there they are getting married. I think that he joined Hillcrest Country Club, which was all Jewish. They invited him to join. I think he was the only non-Jew member.
The first Christian to get in there.
Yeah, I think.
There's so many Frank Sinatra stories in this book that you'll read it again and again and again. And we'll return with Nancy Sinatra in just a moment, because she had several pretty big hit records a few years back, and one has resurfaced. We'll talk about that and more with Nancy Sinatra right after Paula tells you a bit more about how you can get this book. Paula?